We're going to be in 1 Corinthians chapter 10. I don't know. What did you preach on last week, Harley? Don't remember. 2 weeks ago, I taught on the subject, where we go from here. And this week, I have studied on the tongue. The tongue is a powerful tool, and it's a dangerous tool. And we're gonna read a little bit and learn a little bit about the tongue tonight. I look around this room and I'm thinking, all these people here have probably learned that lesson years ago. So this might be more for me than anybody else about the tongue and how careful we need to be with our tongue. But 1 Corinthians chapter 10. Let's see. 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse number 2 says, and we're all baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea, and did all eat the same spiritual meat, and did all drink the same spiritual drink, for they drank of that spiritual rock that followed them, and that rock was Christ. And it's talking about, back in the Old Testament, the Israelites were led out of Egypt. We all know the story. Moses led them out of Egypt, and they crossed the Red Sea, and they were out in the wilderness for 40 years. But verse 10 says, neither murmur ye, as some of them also had murmured, and were destroyed of the destroyer. Now all these things happened to them for examples, and they are written for our... I've got a black mark across, I can't hardly read it. Admonition, upon whom the ends of the world are come. And what it's talking about is they murmured. They complained. You know, the man had come down from heaven, and they got water from the rock. God provided for them, and then the Israelites started complaining again. If you go back and read the Old Testament story, they all complained and complained. Back in Egypt we had this, and back in Egypt this happened, and we're out in the wilderness now. And they were complaining with their tongue. And we need to be very careful with our tongue and not complain. The Bible has a lot to say about the tongue. The tongue is a very powerful tool. Proverbs 18 verse 21 says, death and life are in the power of the tongue, and they that love it shall eat the fruit thereof. Death and life. You know, the tongue can destroy a person. We used to say, when we were kids, you used to have the old saying, sticks and stones can break my bones, but words can never hurt me. And that is the biggest lie. That's the biggest lie. Because you can hit somebody physically, and over time, that pain goes away. But the words that you speak to someone can destroy somebody and for the rest of their life. We watched a movie called... I can only imagine that movie that come out, which it's a contemporary, it's a new age movie, but the story behind it was the dad was very abusive verbally and physically to the son. And for years, this son was tormented with the abuse from his dad. And the abuse verbally from the dad. A lot of times the verbal abuse is worse than the physical abuse because it destroys somebody. Destroys their self-esteem. A lot of times when someone has a self-esteem issue, a lot of times, not all the time, it goes back to being verbally abused. You know, as kids, we're talking about bullying, and that is the use of the tongue. They're putting someone down and destroying somebody with a tongue. And the Bible says death and life are in the power of the tongue. The tongue is a small member of the body, but it's a very dangerous member of the body. In the church, and inside the church, a lot of times, we destroy our churches with our tongue. People over here don't like the people on this side, and then when they go out to eat, they're talking about the member over here. Or they don't like the person over there, and they talk about, oh, that person over there did this week. And you know what? We're not, I think the preacher said it Sunday, we're not required to like everybody. The Bible doesn't say I have to like anybody. I'm supposed to love people, but there's people that I just do not like. I remember when I was in school, there was this red-headed kid, and I'm trying to remember his name, but I did not like him. And I tried to like him, and I just could not make myself like this kid. And you know, I don't have to like, the Bible don't tell me I have to like you. The Bible says I have to love you. And we as church members, we have all different varieties of life. We come from different places. We have different backgrounds. We have different family trees, and because of that, we have different ways of doing things, and we don't have to like each other, but the Bible says we ought to love each other. And because I don't like someone, or like the way they dress, or like the way they look, or like the way they comb their hair, or like the way they sing, we should not run them down. I was at Grace many years ago, I was a teenager, and there was this lady in the church, and she was going to sing that night. And I remember me and some teenagers sitting over here, and they got talking about whether this lady can sing good or not. And I said, I bet she can sing real good. First time she ever sang, and she got up and she sang, and it was horrible. It was horrible. I don't mean to be ugly, but she sang like an opera. I mean, she was an opera-type singer, and I didn't really like it. And she sang several times after that through the years, but the thing is, she was so sincere. This lady was such a sincere lady. And you know what, after a while I thought, it doesn't matter how good you sing. How good you sing doesn't matter, but it's how sincere you are when you sing. God said, make a joyful noise unto the Lord. And I'm glad because I can't sing. But I sat over there and I thought, man, some people are talking about how bad she sings. And I thought, what, shouldn't be talking about how bad she sings. Talking about how sincere that lady is. We should, when we have a problem with somebody, we ought to pray for that person. If someone does not like me, I hope they pray for me. If someone doesn't like the way I teach, because I'm not the smartest person, I look around here that the people here should be teaching to me, but pray for me. If you don't like the way whatever, pray for me. I'd encourage anybody to pray for me. And the same with me and you. If I have a problem with Paul O'Neill, I don't need to run him down. I don't need to go to another member and say, you know what, Paul O'Neill this. I need to pray for that man. Because God might not change Paul O'Neill, he might change me. The problem might be me instead of somebody else. The problem might not, we can complain about somebody else in the church, but the truth is the problem might be us. And we need to use our tongue in a good way. We don't need to run each other down. And I know that's easier said than done sometimes. I had this man at my work, his name's Patrick. This happened about 4 months ago. There was 3 of us, and I don't remember the third one. Somehow we got on the subject of church. And I don't remember what I said, but I said something, and it made the other guy ride off. He just turned around and rode off. And I turned my bike, I ride this bike. It's a tricycle, but it's got a flatbed on the back, and you got your toolbox in the back of it, because I work on the machines at Toyo Tire, the big manufacturing plant. And I turned my bike around, started riding this way, and Patrick rode up next to me, and Patrick cusses every other word. Every other word is a cuss word. He drinks, gets drunk, and he cusses. Patrick rides up next to me. He said, Greg, I want you to know something. I said, what's that, Patrick? He said, believe it or not, he said, I'm a Christian. And I said, Patrick, you're a Christian? He said, yeah, I go to Tabernacle Baptist Church. He said, my wife's a Sunday school teacher over there. And I said, really? He said, yeah. He said, I know I don't talk right, but I'm a Christian. He said, I'm a believer. And he said, I know where I'm going when I die. He said, but I need to clean my mouth up. I know I need to clean my mouth up. But he said, that's what I have a problem with. But he said, I just want to let you know that I'm a Christian. And I remember I was riding off thinking, wow, his wife's a Sunday school teacher, and he is very active in his church. But he was going to Disney World the day before. He was talking about going to Disney World. He said the 4th day is his drunk day. He's going to Disney World, and evidently you can drink at Disney World. He's going to get drunk. But I remember him saying that. I thought, man, I would have never have known. And I worked with another man years earlier. We called him the Angry Man. His name was Steve. And he cussed and screamed and hollered, and you ain't never seen such a fit this man pitched. Every single day, and my boss was a pastor in Rome. He's a godly man. His name's Kenny Woods, and he was my boss, and he said, Greg, I don't know who else to put next to him running this machine because people don't know how to deal with him. And he would scream and holler, and you could hear him halfway across the plant just screaming. And one day I was walking around the machine, and he was in one of his fits, and I walk up, and he turned around and he said, Greg, I'm going to tell you something that's going to shock you. And I said, Steve? I said, I don't think anything's going to shock me anymore. I've about seen it all. He said, I bet I can shock you. I said, there ain't no way you can shock me, Steve. He leaned over right in my face. He said, I used to be a Sunday school teacher. And I said, Steve, you shocked me. And he got out of church because the people in the church, how they talked about each other. But his mouth, you would have never known he was a Christian. And the first thing usually that gives you away that you're a Christian is the way you talk. The way you talk. I can sit sometimes in a restaurant, and by the way someone talks, I can look at him and I think, I wonder if that man's a Christian. And they'll say stuff like, they'll have a good attitude, but they'll say stuff like, you have a blessed day, or something like that, and you're thinking, something's different about this guy. I remember I went to a funeral, my best friend's funeral over at Church of God of Prophecy, and I walked in the door, and there's a man talking there, and I knew that man was a Christian. I didn't know who he was, never met him, but I knew. Something told me that man was born again. And the way he talked, it gave him away. And our mouth is usually the first thing that tells people there's something different. When I worked at Toyo, when I first got hired on, a guy named Christian Miller, he came here a couple times with me, but Christian Miller, with a short time, he got saved, and he talked real bad and was real popular. And anyway, I come in one day and he was reading the Bible. Anyway, I walked up to him, sat down, and was talking to him, and he said, he looked up at me. He said, Greg, you're a Christian, aren't you? And I hadn't been working there a month. And I said, yes, I am. How did you know? He said, I could tell by the way you talked. And your talk gives you away. If you are a born-again Christian and you talk right, it's a dead giveaway. And we need to be careful the way we talk. Running down people, talking bad about people, if you look in marriages, you know what happens in marriages that break up? I talk to my kids and I ask my kids, do you know anybody you go to school with whose parents are not divorced? And my kids said, I can't think of one person whose parents are not divorced. They said, people look at me like, your mom and dad are actually married? And it's like, that's the abnormal. That's not normal anymore. But usually in a marriage, a lot of times, the reason why a marriage fails goes back to the mouth. Either the husband or the wife can't close their mouth, and they run their mouth and they talk bad about their wife, or they complain because they don't have what the neighbor has or what the guy down the street has, and they're constantly complaining. And that's what a lot of times leads to divorce. Unhappy marriage because he's not satisfied or she's not satisfied or she always complains. Have you ever went out to eat with someone who's never happy with what they get to eat? You go sit down at a restaurant and everybody's trying to have a good meal and this person's there, and every single time you go eat with this person, they cannot be happy with the food they get. Call the waitress over and complain. And y'all know people like that. Or we know people who you're scared to ask how they're doing. You walk in church and you ask, then you turn around and you see that one person, don't ask them because they'll tell you how they're really doing. You know, we all have problems. We all have problems. I come in today and, my car broke down or the roof leaking, or we all have problems. But to come in and people want to complain and constantly want to gripe about what's going on in their life. You know what? We ought to be grateful because we're all born again. We're all saved. We don't have anything to complain about. If my roof leaks or my car quits, me and Grant went to visit a couple of weeks ago. We went to visit Miss Morgan. Went to her home and visited. We left there, and we're coming up 41, and my car broke down. And I coasted over the side of the road down there close to the lake. There's a little turnaround. And I coasted over, and it broke down 95 degrees. Me and him's in the car, just pouring sweat. He's in a suit, and we're just pouring sweat. And I had to call Tasha and wait for Tasha to come all 75 shut down. 41 is bumper to bumper. It took Tasha about 45 minutes to get in here and pick us up. And I thought, I don't have anything to complain about. We sat on the side of the road laughing and cutting up. I thought, I don't have anything to complain about because I am on my way to heaven. I am born again. God has forgiven me of my sins. What do I have to complain about? My car broke down? Or the wallpaper ain't the color I want? I mean, I don't have anything to complain about. And here in the Scriptures, here God has led these Israelites out of bondage, brought them out in the wilderness, fed them, gave them everything they needed, and then they complained, and God killed them for it, took their life. The first thing when a lost man looks at us, or when the world looks at us, the world shouldn't see a Christian complaining and constantly murmuring and talking bad about, the preacher at church or the choir director at church did this. You wouldn't believe what he did. Or the world looks at us thinking we're different. The Bible says, come out from among them and be ye separate, saith the Lord. There should be a separation. There should be a difference. When the world looks at me, they should say, something's different about that man. That's what they did with Christ. When they looked at Christ and said, wow, you need to come see this man. He's got words, I've never heard anybody speak like this. And that's what the world ought to see in us. When the world looks at us, they all say, he's different. He ain't like everybody else. And it goes back to the way you talk. and our attitude towards the way we talk. People go to work and they complain about the wife, or the wife goes to work and complains about their husband. You can't be an effective witness to people if you can't clean your mouth up. You can't. And we talked about how Christians would go to work and tell dirty jokes or talk trashy. You cannot be a Christian and be an effective soul winner if you're going to talk that way. I work with a man, and I won't mention his name, but he goes to the First Church of God up in Cartersville, Liberty Square. Big church up there. And he's a good man, but he talks bad. He says stuff he shouldn't say, cusses and talks. And he's a Christian, and he tries to witness to people. And I'm thinking, you can't do that, because no one's going to listen to you if you're not going to live a separate life. So we need to be an example with our tongues. We need to be an example in the way we talk. Speaking the way, complaining and constantly murmuring goes back to rebellion. It's rebellious. It's a rebellious attitude. When you complain, we think, complain to my wife, or you think you're complaining about whatever. You're actually complaining about what God's given you and the life that God's given you. I have nothing to complain about. Sure, would I like to have a new car or a house on a nice house? Anybody would. If anybody had the opportunity today to have a brand new house or a new boat or a new camper or a new truck, you'd be crazy to say, no, I wouldn't want one. But to complain because you have an older truck, I drive an 86 Mustang, a 35-year-old car, I think, 30-something-year-old car, and I'm happy with it. Love my car. And I have nothing to complain about. God has provided and given me everything that I need. James chapter 3. James chapter 3, 1 through 8 says, My brethren, be not many masters, knowing that we shall receive the greater condemnation. For in many things we offend all. If any man offend not in word, the same is a perfect man, and not able to be bridled the whole body. Behold, we put bits in the horse's mouth that they may obey us, and we turn about their whole body. Behold, also the ships, which though they be so great and are driven by fierce winds, yet are they turned about with a very small helm, whithersoever the governor listeneth. Even so the tongue is a little member, and boasteth great things. Behold, how great a matter a little fire kindleth. And the tongues is a fire, a world of iniquity. So is the tongue among our members, that it defileth the whole body, and setteth the fire, the course of the nature, and is set on fire of hell. For every kind of beast, and of birds, and of serpents, and of things in the sea is tamed, and hath been tamed of mankind. But the tongue can no man tame. It is unruly evil, full of deadly poison. And that's so true. So true. Someone sit there and run down somebody else. You can develop an opinion of somebody by what somebody says. Somebody can sit there and run down somebody, and then you meet him, and you think, man, I don't want to be his friend because of the way he talks, or what the other man has said about him. I had a man that I used to be friends with. I hadn't talked to him in years. And I went to church with him. And he went to work for another man that I went to church with. And just a few short months later, he come to me, and he's just running that man, the owner of this company, down. Just run him in the ground. I'll tell you who he is. His name's Phil Bennett. You know Phil Bennett. Some of y'all know Phil Bennett. This other man worked for Phil Bennett and ran Phil Bennett in the ground. He told me, and based on what this man had told me, I thought, man, Phil Bennett must be the lowest of low. But I always reserve my opinion until if you hear 100 people say it, you can start thinking, well, that must be true. One person. So anyway, where I worked, we worked on Phil Bennett's trucks. And his employees would come in. So when one of his employees come in, I said, how do you like working for Phil Bennett? He said, man, Phil Bennett's the best person I ever worked for. I said, really? Kind of surprised me because I expected him to say, he said, Phil Bennett is the best boss and the best man I ever worked. Best job I ever had is working for Phil Bennett. He left. A couple of days later, another guy come in. I asked him. He said the same thing. I had 4 or 5 different people that worked for him. One day, Phil Bennett brings his truck in, and he's up front, and I was working on his truck. I look over, and there's his Bible in the middle of the seat. And I thought, I'm nosy. I opened up his Bible, and his Bible's just notes all in it. And I thought, well, Phil Bennett reads his Bible. You can see the... So sometime later, I had to go up, and I actually worked on Phil Bennett's Chevelle. I was laid off from work, and I went to his business off of 411, pulled in his garage. Sammy was actually working for him part-time. And so I pulled in the back there, and I'm working on his Chevelle. And I had to do a head job. So I walk over to one of his employees working over there, and I said, hey, you like working for Phil Bennett? He said, well, I've worked for him for 8 months. And he said, he's the easiest man I've ever worked for. I said, well, what do you mean? He said, he comes back here, and he's like, have you got the order done yet? And he's like, well, I'm working on it. I ain't got it done yet. All right, well, you're doing a good job. And walks back. He said, he never pushes me or gets on to me. He said, I've never had anybody I've worked for like that. He said, I've never worked for anybody who's like him. And I realized that the other man who ran Phil Bennett down, he was the one that had the problem. It wasn't Phil Bennett. And that was a lesson, which I kind of had it figured out from the beginning, but a Christian man, running down another Christian man. And even if it was true, he had no business running him down. He should have prayed for the man. And he was using his mouth, like this verse number 8 says, but the tongue can no man tame. My mom used to say, if you can't see anything good, don't say anything at all. And that is good advice to take. If you don't have anything good to say about somebody at work or somebody at the school or somebody down the street, then you have no business saying it at all. Even if it's true, you shouldn't say it. And if you have a problem with him, you need to pray for him. And I haven't always done that. I haven't. I'm going to be honest with you. I've had problems with my tongue at times. You get mad at somebody and you start flying off at the mouth. But you cannot be a good Christian if you can't control your tongue. 1 Peter, let's go to Numbers. Numbers 11, chapter 11. Chapter 11, the first verse, I believe it is, says, and when the people complained, it displeased the Lord, and the Lord heard it, and his anger was kindled, and the fire of the Lord burnt among them and consumed them, and them that were in the uttermost parts of the camp. God killed them, took their life because of their mouth. How many times, if you look back through history, I wonder, did God shorten somebody's life because they could not contain their tongue, couldn't control their tongue? I wonder, I don't know, but I wonder how many times God said, you know what, enough, and take somebody out, because God will do that. If you can't, as a Christian, if you can't live right and act right and do right, God will take you. God will shorten your days. Verse 2 says, and the people cried unto Moses, and when Moses prayed unto the Lord, the fire was quenched. And he called the name of the place, I don't even know what that is, because the fire of the Lord burned among them. And the mist, verse 4, and the mixed multitude that was among them fell a-lusting, and the children of Israel, it says fell a-lusting. They were lusting. They were looking at something, and they were wishing they had it. And he said, who shall give us flesh to eat? They were complaining. They were murmuring. The Israelites were, and God destroyed them because of their murmuring and the way they couldn't control their tongue. 1 Peter 3:10 says, for he that will love life and see good days, let him refrain his tongue from evil and his lips that they speak no guile. We need to control our tongue as Christians. We need to control our tongues as husbands and wives. Sometimes, maybe y'all don't, but sometimes you get mad at your spouse. Sometimes your spouse gets mad at you, and you want to fly off at the mouth. And the Bible says if we, should have got the verse written down, but if we give a soft answer, it'll, I'm trying to remember the verse. It turns away wrath. I thought I had it written down. Yeah, I do right here. Proverbs 15:1, a soft answer turneth away wrath, but grievous words stir up anger. You know, a lot of times when you and your wife get in an argument, if you just say, I'm sorry, I was wrong, a lot of times that'll end it. A lot of times. and a lot of times it might be my fault. But even if it isn't your fault, there ain't nothing wrong with saying you're sorry. But we need to learn to control our tongue. Ephesians 4:29 says, let no corrupt communication proceed out of your mouth, but that which is good to the use of edifying, that it may be ministered grace unto the hearers. We should use our tongue in a positive way. I remember years ago, I was in high school, senior in high school. We come into chapel, and it was at Concord Road Baptist Church on Floyd Road, if you've ever been down in Cobb County on Floyd Road. And so we come into the fellowship hall, and we had the chairs set up, and we had chapel. And Larry Kendrick, a godly man, Larry Kendrick's sons are the ones who make those movies, Facing the Giants, Fireproof, and War Room, and all those. And Larry Kendrick is a godly man. Loved Larry Kendrick. Larry Kendrick walked in, and he walked with a cane. If you ever seen Facing the Giants, and the man at the end who said, I'm standing for my son, I don't know if y'all watched the movie, but that whole movie was written about that one scene, and Larry Kendrick did that. In the movie, it's Larry Chandler's, but their dad is Larry Kendrick, and they wrote the whole movie about their dad, Larry Kendrick. And Larry Kendrick had multiple sclerosis, and when he'd come in chapel, he'd have to lock his knees to stand up. He walked with a cane. Now he's in a wheelchair. But he walked in, and I'll never forget it. And we're all sitting in our chairs, and he said, we're going to do something different this week. He said, I want everybody to put their chairs in a circle. And there's about 60, 70 of us, and all the students put their chairs in a circle, and teachers. And we sat down, and he had like a stapler in his hand or a ruler or something. He said, I'm going to take this, and he said, we're going to pass it around the room. And he said, you don't have to, but I encourage you to. He said, when you get it, I want you to say something kind that you respect about another student that they don't know. I thought, man. And I was real shy and timid and didn't talk, and I was sitting there. And I'll never forget, as it went around the room, they'd get it and say, well, I want to tell so-and-so over there that I respect them for whatever. And but it got to a black guy named Jabbar. And Jabbar said, I want to say to Greg Crosley, I respect how he has to work his way through school. He said, everybody else here, parents pay their way. He said, Greg has to work all night so he can come to Christian school. And he said, I respect him for that. And I remember thinking, wow, I didn't think anybody cared that I had to work. I worked from 10 o'clock at night to 7 in the morning. Got off of work at 7 in the morning, went home, took a shower, went to school. And I went to school. My first class was Bible class, and I'd sleep through Bible class every single day. My Bible teacher was Tasha's youth pastor, Junior Boggs. If y'all know him, Junior Boggs or Marion Boggs. He was my Bible teacher. I failed my memory verses. And after third or fourth week, he said, Greg, why don't you memorize your Bible verses? I said, well, Junior, I do memorize my Bible verses. He said, then why don't you quote them every week? Every week you don't quote them and you're getting zeros. I said, there's two things that I'm fearful of. One of them is heights. I'm terrified of heights. The other one's public speaking, believe it or not. I'm terrified of public speaking. And I told him, I said, when I stand up in front of class, I blank out. I can't remember. He said, well, what was the memory verse for last? And we had to learn chapters. He said, the Beatitudes were last week. What is it? And I started quoting. He's like, you know it. He said, well, what was Psalms 150? I said, praise you, Lord, praise God. And he said, what about Psalms 23? And I quoted all that. He said, you have all these memorized. Why didn't you? I said, I can't. When I stand in front of class, I can't do it. I can't do it. So he let me, after class, quote my Bible verses, and I ended up passing his class. But I slept through Bible class because I worked from 10 o'clock at night to 7 in the morning. And then I'd come home, take a shower, go to school. And Jabbar said, I respect that. And that little thing encouraged me so much in high school. I thought, man, somebody actually cared. I mean, it's something small, but I thought he actually had respects that I have to actually pay my way through school. And I remember what a tremendous thing that was because I got a little bit of encouragement from somebody. And I thought, you know what, in life, we should use our tongue, as that verse said, to edify and minister to people, to encourage people. People get down. I get down. I do. There's days when I just feel like I am beat, and I'm thinking, I want to give up. And when someone says the smallest little thing, it encourages. You know, I went out for hernia surgery. I've been out for 5 weeks now. And I had a black man I work with. His name's Al Weeds. Al Weeds is an alcoholic. All he talks about is drinking. Going to Atlanta, getting drunk. And he's one of the men that never has a bad day. He comes into work every day, and he is the happiest person you ever met. And I'm like, I don't know how you can be that way. I'm not a morning person, but he's the happiest person, and he's a Democrat. He's a Hillary Clinton supporter. He's the opposite of me. Everything that I stand for, he's against, and everything he stands for, I'm against. But we developed a friendship, and I can tell him, I don't like Hillary Clinton. I don't like she's against, and he can tell me that he don't like Trump, and we'll kind of laugh and shake hands and walk away, and we're still friends. But Al Weed sent me a card in the mail from work. I get it and open it up, and it's the card to hope you get well soon. And I thought, you know what? That's what we as Christians should do. We should encourage people. When someone's sick, we ought to call them up and say, you know what? We hope you get to feeling better. We ought to, when you know there's somebody at work who's having a bad day, we ought to try to encourage them. I had this guy I was training. He's a Mexican. His name's, you know what, now I can't remember his name. I trained him at work. It'll come to me in a minute. But I trained him at work a couple years ago. And I remember one night I was having a bad night, aggravating night, and he walks off. And I thought, man, I'm training this guy, and he just walks off. He's gone for about 10 minutes. He comes back, and he went and got me a Coke out of the Coke machine. He said, here, Greg, I thought you might want something to drink. And I thought, you know what, that's how we ought to be. We ought to see somebody's need, and we ought to help them and encourage them and try to build them up, not beat them down. We have a tool that can be used either way. We have a tool that can destroy somebody. We have a tool that can build somebody up, help somebody, encourage somebody, strengthen somebody. In your marriage, and I'm not the best at this, I look at Tasha and I think she knows I love her. You know, she knows that I'm appreciative of what she does. But you know what? How much better would it be if I said, you know what, Tasha, you had a rough day and you went to the store, I appreciate what you've done. And I don't do that. I'll be honest with you, I don't do that. I think, well, she knows that. I don't need to tell her that. But what would it mean to somebody if you encouraged them? And we ought to use our tongue as Christians to help people, encourage people. If someone's, I had a man whose his dad passed away. I don't know what to say. When they're lost, you don't know they're born again. But you could go up and try to say something to encourage them or help them. We're thinking about you. This one lady I work with, Linda, her son was drunk and pulled up on a roadblock out in Rockmart. And when he saw the roadblock, he turned around and ran. Police chased him, and then he ended up trying to back his car up to the cops. The cops shot and killed him. It was a big story in the news about 7-8 months ago. And his mom, I work with her, and she's a sweet lady at work, and she was always smiled. But Linda come in after all this happened, and for weeks and weeks and weeks, you could just see it on her face. She said, I know my son did wrong, but he's my son, and I loved him, and she lost her son. And I remember I walked up to her, Linda, I said, Linda, I just want you to know I'm praying for you. I know you're going through a hard time. And tears rolled down her face. She said, thank you. Please keep praying for me. And we can encourage people and help people with our tongue. And a lot of times that will turn around and lead to a seed that we can plant. And hopefully they get born again. And we as Christians and we as a church, especially as a church in this position we're in now, we don't have a pastor. We need to come together. We need to encourage each other and not try to separate each other, not have the cliques in the church. We need to come together. And if we have a difference with somebody across the aisle, or if we don't like the way this person over here acts, you know what? Pray for that person. And try to encourage that person to do better. We all have problems. We're all in the same boat. We're all different levels spiritually. Some of the ones here are higher spiritually than I am. Some of them might be a little lower than I am. I don't know. But we're all on different levels, but we're all on the same playing field. We're all in the same place in life. We need Christ. We need to get as close to Christ as we can get. And we need to encourage each other and pray for each other so that we can all get through life together. I went to Grace Baptist Church when it used to be in Mableton, Garland Odom. And I went there until 96. I left and we got married, moved to Cartersville. Grace is over in Hiram now, and I've been there a couple times in the last 22 years, but different pastor. But When Grace was over in Mableton, we started going there in 72. Well, I was born in 74, but my parents started going in 72 every now and then, Sunday morning. My dad worked with Bill Odom in Atlanta. Bill Odom is Garland Odom's cousin. And Bill Odom told my dad moved over on Brookwood off of Austell Road, and Bill Odom told my dad, my cousin, Garland Odom's a pastor over there. You ought to go visit his church. So my dad and my mom would go every now and then on Sunday mornings, never very active. But the people at Grace took my parents in and loved them. My mom and dad went to church as a Sunday morning Christian. They were both saved earlier in life, but they went to church for 12 years. 12 years before they ever got their life right and got in church. And when they finally got, I'll never forget, it was a Sunday night, and my mom and dad went down to the altar and prayed, and I'll never forget my dad. I was a young thing, sitting about 4 or 5 pews back on this side, and Brother Odom stepped off the platform, walked over the mic, and this man was talking into the microphone. And I thought, who is this? And I was a little thing, and people were in front of me, and I stepped to the side, and I looked this way, I looked that way, and I never could see, and I could tell the man was crying. And I finally got where I could see between 2 people, and I realized it was my dad. And it was the first time I ever seen my dad cry. Tears rolling down his face. And this is what he said. He said, I never lived a wild life, never done a lot of sinful things like the world has to offer. He said, but I wasn't living right. And he said, tonight, everything's right. And things in my home changed after that. My mom and dad began to go Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night. We had visitation on Thursday night. We cut the grass at the church all day on Saturday. We'd get there in the morning and spend 8, 9 hours cutting the grass and sweeping leaves. Sunday morning was bus ministry. Monday night was Awanas. We were in church almost every single day of the week. And my parents are that way now. My parents got their life right. But Grace was such a great church then because the church, they didn't have people talking about each other. They loved each other. If this man over here had a problem, was hurting, boy, it didn't take long for everybody in that church to know, and they were helping him. My parents had 5 kids. There's 7 of us. My mom and dad didn't have a lot of money, and the transmission went out on our van. My dad had a 63 Ford F-100. All 7 of us ride around in that 63 pickup truck. And somebody saw it and said, why aren't you driving your van? Well, transmission went out. Well, they got a phone call that week. Said, take your van down to this transmission shop. We're going to pay to have your van fixed. The church, somebody in the church. Or they come together and they pay to have a transmission put in the van. I remember when I was a teenager, I was walking up the steps coming out of Sunday school, and this man stopped me, Tim O'Shields. He said, Greg, do y'all not have hot water? I said, no, we don't have any hot water. He said, well, how long have you been without hot water? I said, I don't know, 3 or 4 months. We hadn't had hot water. He said, you hadn't had hot water in 3 or 4 months. 3 or 4 months. I said, no. He said, why? I said, well, not a big deal to us. We just keep on going. We had a hot water heater that week. Somebody paid for a hot water heater. But what I'm saying is at that church, we loved each other. When someone hurt, they all hurt. And people helped each other because we all have needs in different ways. But everybody was in one accord. And that's the way this church needs to be. We have 60, 70, 80 people here on Sunday mornings. We need to pray for the man across the aisle. We need to pray for the man over there who's hurting. We need to pray for Miss Walker who just lost her mom. We need to pray for the prayer requests we had tonight. We need to pray for the people of this church. And then we need to try to encourage and help uplift them. If they're not here, we need to encourage them to be here the next week. Sometimes we're sick. Sometimes Richard Newton's not here tonight because he's not feeling well. But we need to encourage the people who are not doing well. We need to encourage the people who are whatever problem they're having. We all have hard times in our life and things that get us down, have a hard week at work, tired. We need to encourage each other, love each other, pray for each other, not run each other down. That's what this church needs to do. And I don't know if anybody's done that. I didn't come up with this lesson because I thought that. I just was led in that direction, probably more so for me than anybody else here tonight, because I need that. I need to be better at encouraging somebody else. Sometimes I'll come in the doors, and because I'm more of a shy and quiet person, like to stay kind of out of sight, out of mind. But I don't go across the aisle to encourage. I think Brian Newton the other day had his equipment stole off his truck. I read on Facebook, second time. Had all his equipment. I know how discouraging that would be. He's a fireman. On his days off, he's trying to make extra money, provide for his family. He pulls up to do some work and comes out and somebody stole all his equipment. Probably, I don't know, $4, $5, $7, $1,000 worth of equipment. That's expensive equipment. I thought, you know what? We need to encourage somebody. You know, it's a ministry just to encourage people. It really is. You think in a church you can't, there's certain things, you know, I'm not a preacher, I'm not a teacher. There's certain things, there ain't nothing at church I can do. You know what? You can encourage people. You can make a ministry out of just encouraging and praying for people. I think churches today have lost the power because they don't have people praying like they once did. We don't have people on our knees praying because it's usually the older generation that prayed, because we didn't teach the young generation how to pray. We didn't teach their kids how to get on their knees and pray. And you lose your power in the church because we're not praying. But we need to encourage each other with our mouths. Encourage somebody. Pray for somebody. And try to encourage somebody to keep going. We as Christians, we're in a battle. We're fighting. God needs Christians who are strong and hard to intimidate. We need to be soldiers. That's what God calls us, to be a soldier. And we need to go out in this world, and it's hard. It's hard at times. You get discouraged, but we need to encourage people. That's why people come in here. A lot of times there's people who drag in here, and they come in here on Sunday morning, and they're thinking, man, my whole world's fell apart. But we need to go up to them, just hug their neck and encourage them. Pray for them. And that's just what I had on my heart tonight. And I don't think anybody here's done that, but does anybody have anything to say? Anybody want to add anything to it?